Robert Maudsley, now 69 years old, has spent over 4 decades confined to an unusual underground cell located within Wakefield Prison, colloquially known as the Monster Mansion. His imprisonment is the result of a life sentence imposed for the murder of 4 individuals, with the unsettling fact that 3 of his victims had once been his cellmates. However, those who are acquainted with him, including friends and family, consistently describe Robert as a person characterized by gentleness, kindness, and extraordinary intellect. Notably, his IQ is classified as genius level, and he possesses a profound appreciation for poetry, art, and classical music. Born in Liverpool in 1953, Robert John Maudsley's early life took a different course. At just 6 months old, he, along with his older brothers Kevin and Paul, as well as his sister Brenda, were placed in the care of Nazareth House Children's Home in Crosby. This arrangement arose from his parents' inability to cope with the responsibilities of raising such a large family. Consequently, social services entrusted the children to a Catholic orphanage, where they received care and guidance under the watchful eye of nuns. It took 9 years before George and Jen Maudsley, who were living in Toxteth with their 5th child, they would eventually have 7 more children, were able to stabilize their circumstances and expressed a desire to reunite with their sons. However, this marked the beginning of the most challenging phase in the childhood of Robert and his brother, as their parents subjected them to constant punishments, degradation, and verbal abuse. These harrowing experiences left a lasting impact on the boy's mental and emotional well-being. Reflecting on his upbringing, Maudsley once recounted, "All I can remember from my childhood are the relentless beatings. There was a time when I was confined to a room for 6 seemingly endless months. My father would only open that door to enter and inflict brutal punishments on me 5 to 6 times a day, using a rod, a belt, and even worse. Regrettably, on this occasion, social services arrived too late. It was a year later when they finally intervened, removing Robert from his family's care when he was 10 years old and placing him with foster parents. While life with his new guardians brought Robert a sense of contentment, the profound damage inflicted by his biological parents proved to be insurmountable. Consequently, at the age of 16, Maudsley made the decision to leave and embarked on a journey to London. Upon his arrival in the bustling capital, Robert became ensnared in a turbulent existence, spiraling into substance abuse involving alcohol and drugs. Battling severe bouts of depression, he made 2 harrowing attempts at suicide, only to be rescued both times from the brink. As a result, the young man found himself admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where he confided in doctors about hearing voices that urged him to commit both matricide and patricide. After receiving treatment, Maudsley made the decision not to return to his foster family, but instead chose to remain in London, supporting himself on the streets. In a pivotal turn of events in 1974, while Robert was soliciting clients on the streets, he encountered John Farrell, a simple handyman. During their conversation, Farrell, for reasons known only to him, shared explicit images depicting child abuse with Maudsley. Perhaps triggered by these images, which stirred memories of his own traumatic childhood experiences, Robert committed an even more heinous crime, taking the life of another man. Maudsley displayed no desire to elude justice. Instead, he voluntarily surrendered himself to the authorities the very next day. Consequently, a court convened, and the 21-year-old was declared mentally unfit, leading to his placement in the high-security psychiatric hospital known as Broadmoor. During his 3 years at the institution, the hospital staff generally provided favorable reports on Robert's behavior. In fact, had it not been for an incident in 1977, there might have been consideration for his release. The incident in question occurred when a fellow patient at the hospital confessed to Maudsley the day before about committing terrible acts against a child. Robert's strong sense of morality compelled him to take action. Alongside another individual receiving treatment at Broadmoor, David Cheeseman. They escorted the confessing man to a cell and became involved in a brutal altercation, tragically resulting in the man's death. In this particular case, the court determined that Maudsley was mentally competent to stand trial, and subsequently, he was convicted of manslaughter, leading to his imprisonment at Wakefield Prison. It was during this period that the infamous moniker, the Brain Eater, became associated with him, fueled by sensational newspaper reports that suggested he had a peculiar penchant for consuming this gruesome delicacy. However, the circulation of a later autopsy report on the victim dispelled this gruesome rumor, but the ominous nickname persisted. Just a few weeks after his arrival at Wakefield Prison, Maudsley once again made headlines in the crime chronicles of newspapers, committing another set of killings, this time claiming 2 lives. On a Saturday morning in 1978, Maudsley lured Salney Durwood, a fellow inmate serving time for the murder of his wife, into his cell. Swiftly and ruthlessly, he ended Durwood's life and concealed the body beneath his bed. Following this gruesome act, he attempted to persuade other prisoners to enter his cell, using various excuses, but none were willing to oblige. Frustrated, Robert entered Bill Roberts' cell, wielding a makeshift knife, and within moments extinguished Roberts' life. After committing this double homicide, Maudsley calmly approached a prison guard and handed over the blood-stained knife, uttering his chilling confession with a disturbing calmness, "You'll be short 2 people at the next roll call." During his trial in 1979, where he faced charges related to these final murders, Robert openly acknowledged that he had envisioned his parents in the place of his victims. His defense attorney argued that these crimes were the tragic outcome of repressed childhood aggression, resulting from relentless abuse. "In these acts, I envision my parents in place of my victims. Their faces are the only ones I see before me. If I had taken their lives in 1970, none of these people would have suffered. I would have been free and at peace," Robert Maudsley revealed in an interview. Following this confession, he was convicted of both murders and sentenced to life in Wakefield Prison. Later, Home Secretary Michael Howard made the decision that Maudsley should never be eligible for parole, ensuring his lifelong incarceration. Since the day of his final murder, Robert Maudsley has endured over 4 decades of solitary confinement, spending 23 out of every 24 hours in isolation. During his limited 1-hour daily strolls, he is accompanied by 6 guards. The prison authorities see me as a quandary. For them, it's easier to keep me isolated, lock the door, and entomb me in a concrete cell. I am left to wither and deteriorate, lamented Robert in a letter to a newspaper. In 1983, a custom-designed cell was meticulously constructed for Maudsley within the confines of Wakefield Prison, measuring 5.5 by 4.5 meters. This cell essentially comprises 2 rooms, distinguished by its bulletproof plexiglass windows and maintained under constant surveillance by a dedicated team of prison guards. Remarkably, this cell bears a striking resemblance to the one later depicted in the film, The Silence of the Lambs, despite having been built 7 years prior to the movie's release. It is worth noting that the creators of the film openly acknowledged that Robert John Maudsley served as the inspiration for the main character, portrayed brilliantly by Anthony Hopkins. Accessing this heavily fortified chamber necessitates navigating through a complex series of 17 locked steel doors. Notably, the sole furnishings within Maudsley's cell consist of a cardboard table and chair. The toilet and sink are intentionally secured to the floor, while his bed is a plain concrete slab topped with a mattress. It's important to highlight that the record for the longest duration spent in solitary confinement was held by Albert Woodfox, who endured nearly continuous isolation in a 2x3 meter cage for 43 years before his release from a Louisiana prison in 2016. In the year 2000, Robert Maudsley filed a petition seeking permission to obtain a cyanide pill because he could not bear the thought of spending the rest of his life in solitary confinement. His request for a suicide application was presented before Judge Maurice Kay at Liverpool High Court. Following an extensive 5-day hearing, Robert's plea was ultimately denied. Following this, Maudsley penned a letter to the newspaper, raising a series of poignant questions. What purpose is served by confining me to my cell for 23 hours a day? Why invest in providing me with meals and allocate resources for it, only to grant me 1 hour of freedom daily? Who do I truly pose a threat to? Given my present circumstances, it appears the only conceivable outcomes are psychological deterioration, the onset of mental illness, or impending suicide. Why can't I have a companion, like a pet parrot, instead of the flies, cockroaches, and spiders that currently inhabit my cell? I pledge to care for it and not harm it. Why am I denied access to a television in my cell to observe the world and learn? Why am I not allowed access to music cassettes to indulge in my favorite classical compositions? Should the prison authorities persistently deny these requests, then I earnestly request the provision of a potassium cyanide capsule, which I will willingly accept. With that, the predicament known as Robert John Maudsley will be promptly and effortlessly resolved.